Greetings, dear friends, to all our esteemed English-speaking auditory. My name is Vasyl Pekhno, and I'm really happy to invite you to watching this video. This is the live fresh update on Ukrainian battle map situation on Russian-Ukrainian war as of June the 27th, 2025. So please join and watch this video. Push your like buttons under it, leave your comments below, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let's start with the overview of the situation on the southern districts, where our special forces are doing really great job.
I'll start with some good news from the southern direction. So in the Crimean direction, directly on the Crimean Peninsula itself, the PRYMARA unit has once again demonstrated its worth. This is a unit of the main intelligence directorate that specializes in striking targets using long-range FPV drones launched from sea platforms. Recently, they have destroyed a significant number of enemy air defense systems precisely in occupied Crimea. And now there is new footage showing the destruction of such important enemy air defense assets as the S-400 Triumph. This is actually an advanced surface-to-air missile system that is among the most capable and is in the possession of the Russian Federation. The S-400 launch platform itself was hit. Two multifunctional S-400 control radars and two S-400 detection radars were also hit. And as is well known, without radars, that is radar stations which serve as the eyes for surface-to-air missile systems, there will be no detection of aerial targets, because radars are the eyes, and if you blind the eyes, air defense will not be able to see. Without them, the systems become incapable of combat. In addition to several systems losing their combat capability, our fighters from the HO primary unit also directly struck one of the system's launchers, and this work in Crimea continues, and it is being carried out in a very systematic way. In addition, yesterday evening there were reports that in Bryansk, a unit of the HO, more precisely drones from the main intelligence directorate's unit, struck a warehouse in Bryansk where rocket fuel and lubricants for the 1061st Material and Technical Support Center of the Russian Army were stored. This attack was carried out immediately yesterday evening right away. Reports appeared in local Bryansk community groups. Residents of Bryansk complained about explosions and a fire in one of the city's districts. Some people said that an oil depot was on fire. It's not an oil depot that's burning, but rather a fuel and lubricants base and rocket fuel storage. The 1061 Stone 1061st Material and Technical Support Center of the Russian Federation Army. In reality, these kinds of long-range strikes target facilities that are easier to hit in terms of logistics. This is the key to stopping enemy breakthroughs, enemy assaults, and the enemy's capabilities and capacities in the broader sense of the word on many fronts, especially in the Donetsk direction, but we'll talk about that later. Since we're already, let's say, reviewing the situation here in the north of our country near Bryansk, let's also talk about Sumy, because yesterday, specifically regarding Sumy and the enemy's advance in the north of Sumy region, there were a number of statements made by Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky saying that the enemy's offensive here has been stopped. These are, in fact, the direct words of the Commander-in-Chief, which he voiced. I will quote exactly verbatim. As of now, the armed forces of Ukraine have stopped Russia's offensive in the Sumy region. This year's wave of the summer offensive from Russian territory is stalling. Let me first clarify, I'll say exactly what Syrsky said. So he reported that in this northern Slobodansky, or rather Sumy direction, as well as in the Kursk direction, where the armed forces of Ukraine are present, because in the Kursk region we also have at least two locations of our presence. This is in the area of the settlement of Hornal right here, and in the area of Tayotkino, the armed forces of Ukraine are also present. Accordingly, in these zones, as well as here, there are currently about 50,000 personnel of the armed forces of the Russian Federation tied down in fighting. Earlier, Syrsky, speaking about the Hrushkivsky district, specifically this Tyotkino area, said that one of the brigades that was supposed to be redirected from here to the Pokrovsk direction was turned around and sent back to defend in the Kursk region. This is considered an achievement, because in this way the Russians did not reinforce their Donetsk grouping, namely in Donbass. I have repeated this many times. It is the main point of attack for the Russian forces. Sumy region, the south, and elsewhere, all of these are distractions from the main point of attack in Donetsk region. Accordingly, here, according to the commander-in-chief, about 50,000 troops are currently tied down in fighting 50,000 enemy troops.
This is the grouping of troops first.
My 50,000 here is a bit messy, but nevertheless, 50,000 are currently tied down in fighting at this location. And this, in principle, corresponds to reality. This is what Syrskyi records as an advantage in this situation. Another thing he mentioned in his comment, which he posted on social media, is that an official has now been appointed who will be responsible for preparing the cities and communities of the Sumy region for defense. And a separate deputy has also been appointed for matters of engineering and fortification arrangement. The question arises, why in the fourth year of the war has such a deputy only now been appointed? Why has engineering and fortification equipment only become a matter of attention for the commander-in-chief in the fourth year of the full-scale invasion? This is a real question because both in the Sumy region and in the Kharkiv region, we have seen these just terrible images, like a haphazard pile of dragon's teeth, anti-tank obstacles that weren't properly placed or prepared for defense. Now even the enemy is mocking this. Here's a screenshot from enemy social media groups showing how they are amused by the situation we have. Dragon's teeth pointlessly dumped by the enemy in a pile at a gas station in Yunakivka, Sumy direction. That's what the Russians are writing, and that's the whole truth. Here are the dragon's teeth just thrown together in a heap, which were not used in the Sumy direction. And this, in fact, is a loss for us 3 times over, four times a loss for us. The first loss is that we as a country spent money on their production. We spent money to deliver them here to the Sumy direction. After spending all this money, we did not install the dragon's teeth for defensive purposes, which should have helped protect the village of Yunakivka. And in the end, all of this has now fallen into the enemy's hands. And the enemy mocks us, laughs at this, and gains media attention. Meanwhile, we are left with arguments and quarrels within Ukrainian society. And they are completely understandable. So in reality, this is in a certain way a question for the commander-in-chief. Why did it take until the 4th year of the war for a dedicated deputy to appear, someone responsible for this? Why have specific individuals responsible for preparing the communities and cities of Sumy region for defense only been appointed now? I understand that this is a rhetorical question, but it is in fact a real problem that we are facing. I just want to remind everyone once again that earlier the head of the Sumy Regional Military Administration, General Artyukh, was dismissed. He was responsible, and yet not quite responsible, so to speak. The greatest punishment he faced was simply being removed from his position. And that's it. All right. Let's move on from Sumy region. So Syrskyi says that the offensive has been stopped, but in reality, in my opinion, making such statements from a communication standpoint is quite a dangerous thing, because tomorrow, somewhere on the deep state map, the front line is actually quite dynamic. The Russians are infiltrating, and even Andrivka in particular has been recaptured. And so if tomorrow some additional red zones indicating enemy presence appear on the deep state map, I think this could be perceived as a total catastrophe by our society. Therefore, if I were the commander-in-chief, of course, I would refrain from, and if I were his communications advisor, I would advise him to refrain from making such statements about a total halt of the enemy in the Sumy region, because this is quite a risky claim that could be disproven in the foreseeable future. After all, the defense is actually dynamic. Yes, the front line has been more or less stabilized, but as for a complete halt, it's probably not worth making such statements. I think that this salient we have now in the Sumy region, this appendix that has formed here, will very much resemble the Vovchansk salient, which appeared in May of last year, when the Russians also broke through at first. Then there were certain scandals, chaos, scandals involving discussions about engineering and fortification structures, and the redeployment of our reserves to stop the enemy. Although all of this was not as chaotic as it was in the Kharkiv region, but I believe that Sumy region is actually calmer for us, especially in terms of information. Nevertheless, the enemy did manage to advance a little. We carried out certain counterattacks. And now, in fact, this wedge is coming to a halt. It will become a sort of dead end that on the one hand will require enemy resources to hold and tie them down here, and on the other hand will still require our resources and control of these positions from our side. Because as practice shows, the Russians will keep coming, they won't spare their personnel, they'll keep sending them in, even if it means using them as bait for reconnaissance, and they'll do it just like, for example, the 225th Assault Regiment demonstrated. Russian vehicles just kept moving forward. Where were they going? Why were they going there? What were their prerequisites, their chances of advancing? Honestly, it was minimal at best, but it seems these enemy Tigers were destroyed by our fighters from the 225th Assault Regiment. Besides that, in the Myropilya area, assume it happened near Myropilya because the Russians themselves reported that just recently they had a bit of a problem there, so to speak, when an entire platoon of their Marines was captured here. So yesterday, the air assault forces of the armed forces of Ukraine reported that they had shown these 15 captured Russian occupiers in the Sumy region. Therefore, I assume that since Russian social media channels were circulating reports about our soldiers capturing an entire platoon of occupiers near Myropilya, it is quite possible that these are the same 15 people that the air assault forces showed yesterday as having been taken prisoner. But I will repeat myself. We need to be very sober in our assessment here, because this appendix, even despite its stabilization and halt, still drains our resources. It can still at any moment be reactivated by the Russians in terms of further advancement. Because the fighting in Vovchansk has not subsided for a moment, nor on the flanks of Vovchansk, as I have reported repeatedly, there, due to the fact that we did not pay enough attention to the defense, the Russians were advancing in the area of Vovchansky Khutory and Taiki. Therefore, this situation in the Sumy region also needs to be closely monitored from both sides right now. Moreover, yesterday there was information that the Russians might once again involve North Korean troops. In particular, South Korean parliamentarians also reported this, citing their own intelligence, saying that in July or August, another fresh batch of North Korean troops could be sent to the Russian Federation into Putin's hands at his disposal. The South Koreans suggest that the reason for this timing is that a new wave of enemy offensive may be planned for July-August. The Russians, in turn, claim that in reality they just want to involve North Korean troops solely for the supposed purpose of restoring the region in the Kursk area. Therefore, if we are talking about the Kursk region, if we are talking about the potential threat of North Korean troops appearing here, which could happen in July or August, we should not rule out the possibility that these North Korean troops could also be involved in a new wave of attacks in the Sumy region, which may occur during the same period. Therefore, these dangers really do persist. And that's exactly why I say that from a communication standpoint, if I were an advisor to the commander-in-chief, I would not recommend that he use, from his official position, so to speak, this phrase about a complete halt or stabilization of the front line in the Sumy region. But overall, the situation in the Sumy region is, well, leveling out, so to speak. Where is it? Extremely difficult. Yes, that is undoubtedly in the Pokrovsk direction. But before moving on to that, I want to mention a certain, how should I put it? No, I'll describe the situation. I won't repeat what's already obvious here. In my opinion, the most difficult section of the front is the Kostiantynivka direction, where our logistics are, well, frankly, just terrible. We have problems in the Novopavlivka direction right here, which in particular, Deep State wrote a detailed post about yesterday. These tentacles that are appearing are only expanding for the occupiers in the area, starting from the open fields of Shevchenko and Burlatsky, continuing through Komar, Fedorivka, Yalta, Zaporizhzhia, and ending with Bahatir, Oleksivka, and Zeleny Kut. Everywhere, the enemy is essentially advancing. Deep State calls this the gradual collapse of this section of the front. They sound the alarm, saying that we will see negative changes on the map here. Well, I understand what those negative changes on the map will be. The enemy will definitely enter the Dnipropetrovsk region from here and will undoubtedly use and accomplish this informational objective of theirs. But in fact, here's what we need to talk about. I understand that these advances are basically unstable, and the unstable front line in this direction is a problem. But in my opinion, this is not the kind of problem that would pose any significant threats to us in the future. In what context am I saying this? Now, I'll try to explain it in simpler terms, but this will be solely my subjective assessment. You don't have to agree with it. You can write in the comments what you think about this. So why do I say that the direction, for example, of Kostiantynivka is quite dangerous? Because here in the Toretsk area, the defense is happening on a 180-degree front. Here we have a settlement, Kostiantynivka itself, which the occupiers are now trying. In fact, they will try to flank it in order to strike, even if only with their FPV drones to disrupt logistics in Drushkivka. From here, the occupiers can also move towards Dobropilia, which is likewise a logistics hub for the Pokrovsk direction, all the way to Pokrovsk itself. Accordingly, there is an operational prospect for the enemy here. What could be their next step? What the enemy could do next here on the Novopavlivka axis, apart from hanging a rag on the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, is to some extent, well, a bit of a mystery to me. Because in this sector, on the Novopavlivka axis, where Deep State describes difficult situations, and on the Pivdeno-Pokrovsk direction, which is also part of Novopavlivka, the enemy doesn't have the capability to advance, say, toward Pavlograd, right? Well, we're far from thinking that they could advance to Pavlograd by making such a deep breakthrough. Although I understand that the population density in Dnipropetrovsk region is much, much lower in terms of the number of settlements and in general in terms of building density compared to Donetsk region. And that's a big problem for us. That's exactly why they're trying not to let the enemy into Dnipropetrovsk region. But nevertheless, for now, there are no signs of such a breakthrough toward Pavlograd, knock on wood, just as there are no signs, for example, of the enemy being able to reach the road behind Pokrovsk and cut off the supply route between Pavlograd and Pokrovsk. So, in my opinion, the enemy has minimal operational prospects here. Of course, I don't claim to have the absolute truth. I could be wrong, but in my view, there isn't such an operationally difficult situation here with prospects for the enemy as there is in Kostiantynivka. That's precisely why I believe the Kostiantynivka direction is much, much more complicated than the Novopavlivka direction. Although, I'll repeat once again, this might be my mistaken judgment. And now there's this big question mark in our thinking, what should be done with the Donetsk front to stabilize? In my opinion, attention should be paid to Zaporizhia and the southern direction. The way enemy logistics are being destroyed, the way enemy wagons and convoys of fuel trucks are being destroyed, here all of this essentially nullifies Russia's ability to advance on Zaporizhia. In the same way, this should essentially neutralize such strikes, let's call them middle strikes, that reach 100 to 150 kilometers deep into Russian positions, as they are meant to destabilize the situation in the frontline area. In general, there is even a certain ongoing discussion right now. For example, our deep strikes, our drones have flown somewhere and carried out a strike. We talk about this strike loudly in the media. In fact, it is beneficial for us to speak loudly in the media about how Russian air defense is full of holes, that we are reaching deep into the rear of the Russian Federation. But the question is about the actual destruction. How effective is the damage caused by those drones that fly into any settlement of the Russian Federation, into their defense enterprises deep in the rear? This damage is considered either unknown to us or relatively moderate, not very significant, because the warhead on the drones is not very powerful. That's why right now, even among engineers and developers, there's an ongoing debate. Maybe we should shift our main focus from producing deep strike drones to drones that could be, let's say, mid-strike drones, which would have a range of up to 300 kilometers, but could be produced in much greater numbers because they are, let's say, less technologically sophisticated products than deep strike drones, and could deliver strikes on frontline areas, effectively destroying all of the enemy's logistics, hitting a fuel truck here, striking an ammunition depot there, or targeting a repair base elsewhere, basically carrying out these kinds of swarm drone, flight sending out swarms of drones. There is such a discussion going on now, and it seems to me that this is essentially the only chance our troops have to stop the enemy's advance in Donetsk region. Because we have to be aware, they have far more troops in the Donetsk direction than we do. They have significantly more capabilities. Therefore, in order to weaken these capabilities, we need to cut off their logistics. We need to strike at their rear. And in particular, by the way, I didn't just randomly draw the side of Luhansk, this arrow that's supposed to fly there, but it was precisely there, right in Luhansk, that yesterday, for the first time, there was a verified strike by a Ukrainian missile drone called Pekhno Hell. Here is this fragment from Pekhno, which, by the way, hit the crossing, and obviously was not the only one. The drone struck the enemy's crossing over the Ada River near Luhansk. Let's take another look at this part of the missile and recognize that it is indeed Pekhno, because it's clearly visible that this is its jet engine. This is what the missile looks like in real life, as it was presented by the president and our Ministry of Strategic Industries. So what I'm getting at is, first of all, the first verified use of the Pekhno missile has taken place Secondly, B, this is our chance to stop the enemy during any of their offensives, to destroy their frontline logistics. This is what, in the near future, both our drone strikes and obviously our missile and missile drone strikes, and potentially even possibly ballistic missiles, should be directed at. That is the strike that happened, I believe, over the weekend in Kamyansk-Shahtinsky when the Atlas oil depot was hit. That's what this is about. It's about depriving the enemy of fuel in the eastern direction, just as they have been deprived of it in Zaporizhia. Obviously, it will be much more difficult with Donbass than with Zaporizhia because of the logistics here. First of all, there is a very short supply line to the Russian Federation. Secondly, those areas have been occupied for a very long time, either since 2022 or even since 2013. I mean, Donetsk itself, Luhansk itself, and this significantly complicates the possibility of cutting off or completely destroying the enemy's logistics in the eastern direction. But in principle, detecting, striking, and doing this in the same way as in the south is the only way to stop the enemy's advance in the east right now, to do something along those lines. By the way, it's also worth noting that our tactics for targeting enemy pilots and awarding E-points for eliminating enemy pilots are having an effect. Soon, I think the Russians will start to feel a shortage of these resources, specifically trained pilots, aviators, FPV drone operators. So this is also bearing fruit. And in fact, I'll wrap up with a nice video shown by the fighters of the 63rd Brigade. This is also about logistics. The fighters of the 63rd are defending the area of the Bryansk forestry, the settlement of Torska, and in their sector of responsibility, the Russians are truly deprived of quality logistics. That's why those assault troops who even make it to some of the forward assault positions are simply starving there and don't even have anything to drink. They are literally dying of hunger and cold while staying at these assault positions. And this is the result of cutting off their logistics. And this is exactly what needs to be achieved. Why am I specifically talking about the 63rd Brigade? Just look at the radio interception video they published yesterday on their pages, which really shows how these Russian assault troops are panicking and hiding, even if they manage to break through towards Torske, how they suffer there without supplies, surviving on dew and grass. Here is this very short snippet of the radio interception.
And it's already the 5th for us, the 4th or 5th. I've already lost count of how long we've been without water. I've even tried eating the grass here or whatever there is, but it's all bitter. And there's not even any dew in the morning.
Can you imagine? They're trying to drink dew. There's none in the morning. And we haven't had water for 5 days now. This is the condition. This is the situation Russian assault troops are in. Here, we actually solve this issue with ground robotic systems. The Russians use disposable infantrymen whom no one cares about and no one actually intends to care about. Therefore, cutting off these logistics, lowering morale, and depriving the Russian army of such combat capability is the only chance we have to stop its advance in the east. So, meat strikes are, in my opinion, and again, I'm only giving my subjective impression how it should be or how it could be, and you can write your thoughts in the comments. Some may disagree, some may agree. Write what you think about this in the chat for this video. Also, subscribe to us and like this video. Subscribe to my Telegram channel as well. The link to it is in the description of this video. Take care of yourselves, friends. All the best, and see you next time.